Very good evening, dear students. Welcome to BAJIRAO IAS Academy, the Hindu News Analysis. Today is 22nd July 2025, and today we have some very important topics for the discussion. So, one by one, we'll try to discuss all these important topics in a very detailed and in-depth manner. And PDF of this discussion is available in the description section, and you can easily access the PDF of this discussion. So without any further delay, let's get into the discussion, and I hope these classes are substantiating or contributing to your current affairs preparation for the state PSC and UPSC examinations. So the first topic with which we are going to start this session is that we all knew that Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar submitted his resignation to the President yesterday. So therefore, in this context, we'll understand some important constitutional provisions about the office of the Vice President and other important details about this. Now first, understand the context of this topic. The context is that Vice President Jagdeep Dhankar resigned before completing his term of 5 years. So he just completed a term of 3 years and 2 years still remaining, but he submitted his resignation to the President. So therefore, he created a rare mid-term vacancy in the second highest constitutional office in India. Now understand one thing, that the office of the Vice President is called as the second highest constitutional office in India after the office of the President. So therefore, he created a rare mid-term vacancy. Now, if you look into the constitutional provisions that deals with the office of the Vice President, Article 63 of the Indian Constitution talks about the office of the Vice President. So it says that there shall be an office of the Vice President of India. So in this context, you should remember the constitutional article 63. This is very important. Next, Article 66 of the Indian Constitution talks about the election of the Vice President of India. Now in India, both President and Vice President are elected indirectly by an electoral college, which consists differently for the President and the Vice President. Now we will also understand about the electoral college of the Vice President of India as well. So therefore, Article 63 talks about the office of the Vice President of India, and Article 66 talks about the election of the Vice President of India. And next article 67B of the Indian Constitution says that the Vice President may resign by writing under his hand address to the President of India. Now in this case also, the Vice President Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar submitted his resignation to the President of India. However, here the Constitution does not provide for an acting Vice President in case the Vice President resigned to his office. So therefore, you have to remember that the Constitution is silent, or it does not provide for an office of acting Vice President of India. But you have to remember all these three articles, which are very important. Now, what are the functions of the Vice President of India? Now, if we talk about the functions of the Vice President of India, he is an ex officio chairman of the Rajya Sabha. So you might have very often seen Vice President taking over the sessions of Rajya Sabha, right? So therefore, he is considered as an ex officio chairman of the Rajya Sabha as per Article 64 of the Indian Constitution. However, in the event of resignation of the Vice President of India or any vacancy to the office of the Vice President of India, the Deputy Chairman of the Rajya Sabha performs the Chairman's duties, right? So as of now, since Vice President resigned, the Chairman of Rajya Sabha is the Vice President of India. The monsoon session of the Indian Parliament has already started. The Deputy Chairman of the Rajya Sabha will preside over the sessions of Rajya Sabha, right? So I hope it is clear for you. And therefore, here Article 64 of the Indian Constitution, it says that the vice president is the ex officio chairman of the Rajya Sabha. Now, what is the election procedure of the vice president? How a vice president is being elected? Now, we have to understand that the election to the office of the vice president is conducted under the Presidential and Vice Presidential Elections Act of 1952. Election Commission of India has been given the responsibility to conduct elections to the office of the vice president. Now, along with the office of the vice president, the Election Commission of India also conduct elections to the office of the president, to the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, we call it as a parliament, and state legislative assembly and state legislative council. To all these offices and houses, the Election Commission of India has been given the responsibility to conduct elections. So I hope you knew about this and you are also clear about this, right? So however, the elections to the office of the president and vice president are being conducted under Presidential and Vice Presidential Election Act of 1952. And in fact, the electoral college to the election of the vice president of India, it comprises of both houses of the parliament's members, both Rajya Sabha and Lok Sabha, including the nominated members. So one difference with the election of the president with the election of office of the vice president. So here in vice president's election, the electoral college comprises of members of both houses of Lok Sabha and the Rajya Sabha, including the nominated members. So however, when we talk about the election of nominated members, so when it comes to the election of the office of the president, the nominated members are excluded from the electoral college to the election to the office of the president of India. We all knew that president appoints 12 nominated individuals to the Rajya Sabha, right? So therefore these nominated individuals would not be part of the electoral college or election to the office of the president, right? And in fact, the election to the office of the vice president uses the proportional representation system by means of a single transferable vote through a secret ballot. So the elections to the office of the vice president and president, they're not direct elections, they are indirect elections, and the election uses the proportional representation system by means of a single transferable vote, and it also uses the secret ballot as well. And another difference between the election of the president and the vice president is that the members of the state legislature will not participate in the election of the vice president. However, in the election of the office of the president, the members of the state legislative assembly will participate, right? So I hope it is clear for you and you have understood this. Now, what is the term of office for the office of the vice president? Now, unlike a by-election for the Lok Sabha or for the Rajya Sabha seat, now in case if a by-election takes place for a Lok Sabha or a Rajya Sabha seat, the elected member would serve in the office as a member of Rajya Sabha or a Lok Sabha for the remainder of the period only. So I hope you knew what I'm talking about. So for example, imagine that a Lok Sabha member whose term is 5 years, and in this case this member resigned after 2 years of his term, and by-election will take place and the elected candidate will serve only 3 years, right? So he will serve only 3 years and fresh elections would take place after that. So therefore, unlike by-election for a Lok Sabha or a Rajya Sabha seat, a newly elected vice president would serve a full 5-year term, not the remainder of the predecessor's term. Now, I would like to explain this to you again. So here, vice president, the former vice president Mr. Jagdeep Dhankar, who served 3 years, who served 3 years. So therefore 2 years the remainder of the period, because the total period is 5 years. Now in this case, in case a fresh election takes place, if a fresh election takes place, then the new vice president will not serve 2 years, but he will serve a full term of 5 years in the office. So that is the difference between the members of the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha and the office of the vice president. I hope you have understood this, and let's move on to the next important topic, which is India-UK Free Trade Agreement. Now this India-UK Free Trade Agreement is also very often in news, and India is trying very hard to have a free trade agreements or bilateral trade agreements with number of countries, including UK, US, Canada, and blocs like European Union as well. Now in this context, India-UK Free Trade Agreement is very significant because it could increase the bilateral trade between these two countries manifold, and it will benefit both these countries by further strengthening trade, commerce, investments, and services. So all these factors, and the other thing is that India is also having trade surplus with UK. So therefore the free trade agreement will benefit both these countries. And this topic is very important for your General Studies paper 2. So in General Studies paper 2, International Relations section, so you have a number of topics, and one such topic is India's relations with the major centers of power, right? So therefore this is very important for the General Studies paper 2. Now what is the context of this topic? Now if we talk about the context of this topic, India and UK, so they are very close to the finalization of the free trade agreement, right? So they're very close to the finalization of the free trade agreement between these two countries. So therefore this free trade agreement placed a significant emphasis on the global capability centers. So we'll be understanding what are these global capability centers, right? So it places a key emphasis on these global capability centers, as you know, they are being identified as a key driver of digital and service sector cooperation, right? So they will ensure bilateral digital and services sector cooperation between India and UK, and that is why the India-UK Free Trade Agreement placed significant emphasis on the global capability centers. Now if we talk about the strategic framework that has been adopted in the Free Trade Agreement for the global capability centers, so first of all, so let's understand, you know, deeply what is the importance or the significance of these global capability centers. So with over 1500 global capability centers, so these 1500 global capability centers have been employing around 1.9 million professionals, right? So the 1500 global capability centers alone employing 1.9 million professionals, and India has emerged as the global hub for the digital transformation that we have seen with UPI, right? So UPI has revolutionized the digital payments, and India also launched some flagship programs like Digital India. And in fact, such programs also helped in the digital transformation of India. So therefore, the global capability centers will ensure the digital transformation, in India, and they can also ensure the research and development, cyber security, an emerging area, and even the analytics as well, right? So this is the one important element of the global capability centers that the free trade agreement between India and UK has been emphasizing upon. And in fact, the UK based companies, they are looking at India not merely as a cost effective destination, right? So no doubt that India is a cost effective destination if they invest in India, right? So if they invest in India, so India would be a cost effective destination. But UK companies are not just looking at India as a cost effective destination, but also a strategic partner in technology driven service delivery. And these global capability centers can actually play a very, very important role in the technology driven services delivery. And that is the reason that this free trade agreement has been emphasizing on the global capability centers. However, here the proposed free trade agreement between India and UK can facilitate the talent mobility, and that is very important because we have a huge talent pool in India. So even though to some extent it might contribute to brain drain, but we have a huge talent pool. And this free trade agreement between these two countries would facilitate the talent mobility, and it could further harmonize the digital governance standards through programs like Digital India. India has completely transformed its digital landscape, so therefore harmonizing the digital governance standards also very important between India and UK, and the lower regulatory hurdles for both these countries, thereby further strengthening and further deepening UK-India collaboration in the global capability centers development. And you can also go through the pros and cons of a free trade agreement if it is signed between two different countries. So if I can say that a free trade agreement can have some advantages like economic growth, economic development, lower government spending, employment generation, and social security, social safety nets, and the technology transfer. So all these are some advantages or benefits of a country which has been going for a free trade agreement with another country. However, the disadvantages including increased job outsourcing, poor working conditions, and the degradation of the natural resources. This could also takes place because of the free trade agreements as well. Now, if imagine we don't have any free trade agreement with China. Now, China is known for its exports and dumping of its cheap products into the markets of the developing countries. Now, if we have a free trade agreement with China, so China would start dumping the cheap products into the Indian markets, and that would hit the Indian domestic manufacturing sector. So don't you think this is also a disadvantage for the Indian industries as well, right? So now we'll be understanding that the policy push that is actually required and subnational initiatives as part of the free trade agreement and developing these global capability centers. Now, Indian government through the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, so it has already initiated the formulation of the National Global Capability Centers policy, right? So we already have the National Global Capability Centers policy. So this particular policy also involved some stakeholders, such as it has involved NASSCOM, right? So it has involved NASSCOM, it has involved Genove, and it has even involved the Invest India as well, right? So in fact, this has been outlined in the union budget as well. So therefore, this further strengthens India's ability to have the technology driven service sector and further strengthens its capability to ink the free trade agreements with the other countries as well. However, there are some states like UP, so they have been independently developing and advancing the global capability centers agendas, through the initiatives called the Global Capability Centers Conclave. And these states have been particularly targeting Tier 2 cities such as Lucknow, Varanasi for the infrastructure development, so that they could align their infrastructure with the needs of the global capability centers. And in fact, the expert consultations have also raised some questions about the merits of a centralized national policy. So it is being suggested that there is a need for a decentralized national policy. But expert consultations have already raised some questions about the centralized national policy versus organic, decentralized or state-driven models, specifically regarding the governance harmonization and the competitive federalism. Now, if you look at the functions of the Global Capability Center, so what sort of a functions these Global Capability Centers can actually perform? For example, they provide IT and software development services. They also provide the business process management services, human resources management, risk management, compliance, and marketing sales support. All these services that these global capability centers would actually provide. Now, what will be the geopolitical implications of India and UK free trade agreement, and what will be the future pathways in this context? Now, for post-Brexit, so we all knew what exactly is a Brexit. Now, earlier UK was a member of the European Union. However, recently UK withdraws itself from the membership of the European Union, and which is called as Brexit. So Britain's exit from the European Union is called as Brexit. So after post-Brexit, so UK's access to India's digital economy further strengthens its service sector, right? So in fact, UK's access to India's digital economy, because India has made a rapid strides in its digital transformation, digital economy. So UK's access to India's digital economy further strengthened its service sector. However, for India, the British capital, the British foreign direct investment plus the expertise would align with both FDI, or the capital and the expertise would align with India's ambitions to move in the global value chains, to move up in the global value chains, or further strengthening global value chains, or achieving the supply chain resilience. However, there are still issues which are existing between India and UK. They are including double taxation avoidance agreement, data localization, and the mobility restrictions, right? So double taxation avoidance. So what exactly is a double taxation? So double taxation actually means that so you will be taxed in two different jurisdictions, right? So instead of you being taxed in two different jurisdictions, so how about taxing you in just one jurisdiction, right? So therefore, the double taxation is one issue, data localization and regulations another major issue, and mobility restrictions as well. For example, if Indian workforce migrating to UK is not ready to give visas to the Indian workers or skilled workers. So therefore, there are some mobility restrictions on the part of the UK as well, that India has been very often raising this matter with the UK. So they are being identified as a key bottlenecks or the key issues. So therefore, their ultimate resolution is important for unlocking the global capability centers scalability as part of the free trade agreement between UK and India. So in this context, so UK and India free trade agreement can give rise to a robust knowledge corridor, right? So it can give a sustained push, a sustained boost to the knowledge corridor. So wherein the global capability centers would serve as engines of innovation, economic diplomacy, and the professional exchange between the two democracies, right? So I hope you have understood this topic. Now you can also go through what would be the major gains for Indians through the free trade agreement with UK. right? So this agreement could allow the Indian workers to travel to the UK for work without changing Britain's point-based immigration system. Right, so these are all the benefits that India could have if we have the free trade agreement with the UK. So the next important topic is, so India's great power status might be threatened because of the rivalry that has been taking place in the Middle East. So therefore, we will be understanding what could be India's potential threats going ahead, and how India can actually navigate these threats, and how can India can actually emerge as the great power. So this topic has been given in the Hindu newspaper, and this is important for the gender studies paper too. In international relations section, this topic is very important, and this is also very important for your interview as well, because we are going to discuss some recent issues which have been taking place in Middle East and other parts of the world, and how those issues are affecting India's stance. Now, what is the context of this topic? Now, the context of the topic is there is a conflict between US, Iran plus Israel. So I would say that a renewed conflict between US, Iran and Israel. So US sided with Israel, and US even carried out airstrikes on nuclear facilities in Iran. So therefore, I would say in Middle East, so there is a renewed conflict between these three countries, and it underlines the risks of instability in West Asia, right? So the renewed instability in West Asia or the Middle East. So this conflict would lead to the instability in the Middle East. So that could pose a direct strategic and economic challenges for India, right? So it is being said that it can pose both economic as well as economic and strategic challenges for India. So if we talk about the strategic challenges, so it is very important that India remains a major power in the Middle East, right? So strategic challenges in the sense that India is maintaining good relations with both Iran and Israel. So therefore now India needs to balance its relations with both Israel and Iran. Now when we talk about the economic, so energy security might be threatened. We have been procuring around 85% of our energy from other countries, crude oil from other countries, and the diaspora population and the remittances that we have been generating from the Middle East. So therefore we might face both economic and the strategic issues because of this instability that has been taking place in Middle East. Now, in this context, we'll be understanding that India's foreign policies remain committed towards the multipolarity. So we wanted a multipolar world. So what is a multipolar world? There are multiple centers of power, unlike Cold War period where we have seen two major centers of power. And after the fall of the Soviet Union, we have only one single power, that was the US. Right? So therefore India remains committed towards a multipolar world order. So in this context, the regime change in Iran could further entrench US-led unipolarity in the region, right? So if there is a regime change in Iran, so that might lead to US-led unipolarity in West Asia, eliminating independent regional powers such as Iran that could counterbalance American influence. So as of now, UAE, Saudi Arabia in Middle East, they are adopting the policy of strategic autonomy. They are balancing both US, Russia, and for that matter China also, right? So they have been adopting the policy of strategic autonomy, and because of that reason, to some extent, they have been challenging the unipolarity which is existing in Middle East. But Iran has been challenging US hegemony in the Middle East. So if US is successful in, regime change in Iran, so that would lead to the US led unipolarity in the region, right? By completely eliminating the independent regional powers that could counterbalance American influence. However, this will hinder India's aspiration to expand its strategic autonomy in West Asia. So if there is a US-led unipolarity in the Middle East, so there might be chances that India will not be able to meet its expectations, meet the national interest priorities in the Middle East, because Middle East will continue to be under the US hegemony or the US influence. So that could be a major threat for India. So apart from that, India's diplomatic leverage with Israel or Gulf nations, so they're being premised on its ability to simultaneously engage with both Iran and Syria. Now understand, Iran and Syria are being rivals, right? So as of now, India's diplomatic leverage with both Israel and Gulf nations is premised on its ability to simultaneously engage with both Iran and Syria. So it's not Syria, I would say it's Israel, right? So India can simultaneously engage with both Israel and Iran. They are rivals. So however, the fall of Iran would strip Delhi of this balancing capability. So we will not be able to balance between Israel and Syria. So if there is a fall of Iran or regime change in Iran, because that would ensure US-led unipolarity in the Middle East. And as I have already told you that India has been importing around 85% of its crude oil needs from the other countries, right? So we don't have the self-reliance when it comes to our energy security. And in fact, Iran is one of the most reliable supplier. So Iran is the reliable supplier of the crude oil, right? So the post-Iran scenario, dominated by US aligned oil regimes, would undermine India's energy diversification strategy. Now, what is this energy diversification strategy that India is adopting? Now, if I say about this energy diversification strategy, so it is important for India to achieve energy security. So in order to achieve energy security, so we should not depend on one single country or very few countries. Rather, we should depend on multiple countries to secure our energy needs, which is called as the energy diversification strategy, and therefore it will potentially affect India's energy diversification strategy if US continues to dominate the the oil producing countries in the Middle East. Now here there is a clash of global visions. For example, India stands for multipolarity, but US stands for the unipolar world, right? So US wanted its hegemony should be continued, but India wanted a multipolar world, right? So as I've already told you that India's commitment to multipolarity, as India's external affairs minister openly advocated a multipolar world order. So India's external affairs minister S. Jaishankar openly talked about a multipolar world order. And in fact, India is identified and recognized as a middle power. So India is a middle power, and India will be able to protect its interests better in a multipolar world order rather than US-led unipolar world order. Rather, China and US led a bipolar world. So therefore, India remained committed for a multipolar world order. However, this is at odds with the West preference for a US-centric global hierarchy, right? So, West wanted that there should be a US centered global hierarchy. So therefore there are contradictions, there are differences. So therefore it actually reveals the deeper contradictions between Delhi and Washington. So I hope you have understood. So India wanted a multipolar world order and US wanted a unipolar world order. So therefore there are deeper contradictions between both Delhi and Washington. And even during Russia-Ukraine war also, India faced Western pressure, and India even refused to isolate Russia following the Ukraine's war. And India, commissioning of Russian-made warships and purchase of discounted oil. So all these factors illustrate a steadfast pursuit of autonomy in the global affairs on the part of India. Right? So India adopted a policy called strategic autonomy, that India continues to pursue the path of strategic autonomy despite the Western pressure. And in fact, the Western corporate and strategic establishments, they are perceiving India as a country which has been drifting from their strategic orbit. Especially India finds itself ideologically and pragmatically very close to Russia and China on multipolarity. Now here, to some extent, both Russia and China also wanted a multipolar world order, and India also wanted a multipolar world order, and that's why India is much more closer to Russia and China ideologically and pragmatically compared to US. So there are some challenges between India and US. So kindly go through the challenges between these two countries. And what are the policy options that we have and the diplomatic pathways for India to follow. Now here, India can use its strategic capital. Right? So we have the strategic capital and we can use that strategic capital with US to urge non-intervention in Iran, highlighting adverse impacts such as a war would have on Asian powers, particularly India and China. Right? So how a war in Middle East would affect India's strategic interests, India's economic interests in the Middle East. So therefore India can use its strategic capital to urge US on non-intervention in Iran, firstly. Secondly, India's neutral positioning, which was seen during the Russia-Ukraine war. So I would say that India's position during Russia-Ukraine war was a neutral position. So that neutral position during the Russia-Ukraine war indicates that its cooperation cannot be assumed. So therefore, India can use this to negotiate restraint in Western Asia to return for a quiet diplomatic support elsewhere. And in fact, India should encourage US to accept a more distributed global power structure as a preferable alternative to endless conflict or rise of exclusive Chinese regional dominance. Right? So therefore, US should accept a more distributed global power structure that is in line with the India's objective of multipolarity or the multipolar world order, and that could be a preferable alternative to endless conflict or the rise of exclusive Chinese regional dominance. So what should be the way forward in this context? So the way forward including India should continue to assert the strategic autonomy as a policy choice. Right? So India should continue India's policy of multi-alignment. So India should align with the number of power centers, not with one country or one group of one bloc. And India should resist pressure to isolate countries such as Iran and Russia. So there is a constant pressure from the Western countries to isolate both Iran and Russia, but it involves India's defense interests, India's strategic interests, India's energy security, and the economic interests as well. So therefore, India should continue to follow the policy of strategic autonomy, and India should also resist pressure from these Western countries. So apart from that, there is a need to further strengthen the regional engagements. So for that to happen, we need to deepen ties with regional actors including Central Asia, Gulf state, Southeast Asia, to mitigate over dependence on the West Asia. So apart from that, we should invest in indigenous energy and security capabilities as well. For that to happen, we should develop domestic energy alternatives, strategic deterrents to withstand the geopolitical shocks as well. So this should be the way forward that India should follow. One is further asserting the strategic autonomy, strengthening the regional engagements, and investing in the indigenous energy and security capabilities so that we will not depend on other countries. So achieving self-reliance in line with India's Atmanirbhar Bharat vision. So next important topic is legal status of voting right or right to vote. So let's understand the context, and this could be important for Gender Studies paper 2, and this could be important for the prelims exam as well, right? So what is the context of this topic? The context is that so there is a special intensive revision that has been carried out by the Election Commission of India in the state of Bihar, and later opposition parties went to the Supreme Court about this special intensive revision, and in this context the Supreme Court is reviewing the petitions on the electoral roll revisions in the state of Bihar. So during the hearings, a key issue raised is whether the right to vote in India is a statutory right, a constitutional right, or a fundamental right. So this is the key question that has been raised. Right, so we need to understand whether the right to vote is a statutory right, constitutional right, or a fundamental right. So a question is also asked, so right to vote and to be elected in India is what? Whether it is a fundamental right, natural right, constitutional right, or a legal right. So such questions will also be asked in your exam. So there are some different types of rights in India. For example, natural, not just in India, but around the world. Natural rights, fundamental rights, constitutional rights, and statutory rights. So let's try to understand these rights in a much deeper way. Now, if we talk about the natural rights, so natural rights are inherent rights like right to life, right to liberty. So they are natural rights. They might not be guaranteed by any book or any law, but they are natural rights. Right? So for the sake of being human, you enjoy certain rights which might be called as natural rights. Right? So they are not directly enforceable unless protected under the fundamental rights. So second factor is fundamental rights, which are guaranteed by the Indian Constitution, particularly part 3 of the Indian Constitution, and they will be enforceable by Article 32. So Article 32 talks about what? So kindly type that in the comment section. So Article 32 talks about what? Now, the third type of rights are constitutional rights, so which are provided in the Constitution but outside Part 3. For example, right to property, which is outside the fundamental rights, right to trade, taxation, which are enforceable via Article 226. So Article 226 talks about the writ jurisdiction of high courts. It talks about the writ jurisdiction of the high courts. Now, statutory rights, so they are created through the ordinary laws. For example, Manrega, Forest Rights Act, National Food Security Act. So they are being enforceable as per the respective legislative provisions. Now, if we talk about the right to vote and the current legal interpretation by the Supreme Court. So Article 326 of the Indian Constitution ensures universal adult suffrage, subjected to 18 plus years of age, residency, and absence of disqualification. So what is a universal adult franchise? So everyone who is above 18 years of age are eligible to vote irrespective of race, caste, sex, place of birth. So there will be no discrimination, which is called as universal adult suffrage. So India is a first country which has implemented the universal adult suffrage. So Section 62 of the Representation of People Act of 1951, so it grants right to vote to those who are on the electoral roll, excluding prisoners and the disqualified persons. right? So there are some verdicts from the Supreme Court. So first verdict is NP Ponnuswamy 1952 and Kuldeep Nair 2006. So in this case, the Supreme Court held that right to vote is a statutory right. However, in People's Union for Civil Liberties Rajbala 2015, so the Supreme Court held that right to vote is a constitutional right. In Anub Baranwal, a majority bench of the Supreme Court reaffirmed that right to vote is a statutory right, but there are some judges who have given the dissent opinion, saying that the right to vote is a constitutional right, so which is linked to Article 19(1) Clause 1, right? Now, if we talk about the Representation of People Act, so Representation of People Act 1950, it deals with electoral roll and qualification for registration. And Representation of People Act 1951, it talks about the conduct of elections, disqualifications and the voting procedures. Section 16, Section 19 of the Representation of People Act, so it disqualify non-citizens and underage persons from the voting. So both acts are crucial for ensuring the democratic process and electoral integrity in India, right? So therefore it is not yet clear whether the right to vote is a statutory right or the fundamental right or the constitutional right. So that's all in this lecture, and thank you so much.